A 68-year-old black woman was blocked from entering her own company parking lot and told to turn her broke-down car around before security called the real police. "I said move this vehicle now, or I'm having you towed and arrested for trespassing." The security guard slammed his palm against her driver's side window so hard the entire car shook. Dorothy Mae Jenkins gripped her steering wheel, her heart pounding, her eyes burning with 68 years of controlled dignity threatening to overflow. The guard, a thick-necked man named Bradley Hutchins, stood with his chest puffed out, his hand resting on his radio like he was some kind of authority, his lip curled with disgust at the elderly woman in the 10-year-old Honda Accord. But Bradley Hutchins had no idea that within the next 15 minutes, his entire life was about to collapse, and that the woman he just humiliated held the power to end his career with a single sentence. It was 7:15 in the morning in Atlanta, Georgia, a crisp Saturday in October. The Meridian Technologies corporate campus sat like a glass fortress off Interstate 85, its towering headquarters gleaming against the early morning sun. This was one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the Southeast, valued at $4.7 billion. And Dorothy Mae Jenkins? She built it from nothing. 43 years ago, Dorothy started Meridian in her garage in College Park with $200, a used computer, and a dream that everyone told her was impossible for a black woman from the projects. Now she was the CEO, the majority shareholder, and the reason 3,000 people had jobs. But today wasn't supposed to be about business. Today, Dorothy was coming in early to personally prepare the conference room for her granddaughter's surprise birthday party. The staff had organized everything, but Dorothy wanted to add her own touch: family photos, her famous pound cake, and the handwritten letter she'd been working on for weeks. So she'd thrown on a simple house dress, her comfortable driving shoes, and her late husband's old cardigan. No makeup. No jewelry except her wedding ring. Just a grandmother on a mission. She didn't expect any problems. She'd been parking in this lot for over 20 years. But here's the part that changed everything. There was a new security guard at the gate. Bradley Hutchins had been hired 3 weeks ago. He was 29 years old, former More Security, and according to his own inflated opinion, destined for law enforcement greatness. When Dorothy's Honda Accord pulled up to the executive parking gate, Bradley didn't see a CEO. He saw an old black woman in a cheap car. And he'd already decided she didn't belong. This is private property." Bradley stepped out of the security booth, his chest puffed out. "Executive parking only. You need to turn around." Dorothy smiled patiently. "Good morning to you too, young man. I'm Dorothy Jenkins. I just need to scan my badge and—" "I don't care what your name is." Bradley cut her off, his voice dripping with condescension. "I've never seen you before, and this lot is for executives only. Not visitors. Not cleaning staff." He looked pointedly at her house dress. "Not whatever you are." Dorothy felt her jaw tighten. 68 years old. 68 years of building something from nothing. And this child was talking to her like she was trespassing in her own house. "Young man." Dorothy kept her voice steady. "I've been parking in this lot since before you were born. Now, if you'll just let me scan my badge." "There's no badge that's going to change what I see." Bradley stepped closer to her window. "And what I see is someone who doesn't belong here. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to put this car in reverse. You're going to drive back the way you came. And you're going to stop wasting my time." Dorothy stared at him. She'd faced racism her entire life. Bankers who wouldn't give her a loan. Investors who laughed her out of rooms. Competitors who tried to steal her patents because they assumed a black woman couldn't fight back. She'd beaten them all. But something about this moment, being spoken to like this at the entrance to her own company, the company she'd sacrificed her marriage, her health, and her sleep to build, felt like a punch to the chest. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Dorothy said quietly. "Please let me scan my badge." Bradley's face twisted. "Listen here, Grandma." He leaned down until his face was inches from her window. "I don't know what kind of hustle you're trying to run. Maybe you're trying to get inside to steal something. Maybe you're confused and wandered off from a nursing home. But I'm not letting some random Section 8 woman into a billion-dollar company on my watch." Dorothy's hands trembled on the steering wheel. Section 8. He really just said that. Now move this vehicle, Bradley shouted, slamming his palm against her window, or I'm having you towed and arrested for trespassing. The sound of his hand hitting the glass made Dorothy flinch. And that's when something inside her shifted. She'd spent 68 years being patient, being graceful, taking the high road while people who looked like Bradley tried to make her feel small. But she wasn't going to be quiet anymore. Dorothy reached for her phone. Bradley laughed. Oh, what? You gonna call someone? Go ahead. Call whoever you want. By the time they get here, you'll be in handcuffs. Dorothy didn't respond. She simply pressed a single button. But here's the part that changed everything. Bradley had no idea that Dorothy's phone was connected to the company's entire security system. That single button press activated the dashcam on her car, the security cameras at the gate, and sent an automatic alert to Meridian's head of security. Every word Bradley said from this moment forward was being recorded and transmitted directly to the security command center. And there were 17 people watching. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would expose a pattern of behavior that went far beyond one racist security guard, and would shake Meridian Technologies to its core. Be honest, what would you have done in Dorothy's position? Would you have driven away? Demanded a manager? Or stayed exactly where you were? Dorothy stayed. She put her car in park, folded her hands in her lap, and looked straight ahead. Bradley's voice dropped to a threatening growl. I'm not playing with you. Move this car now. No. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Bradley's face turned red. In 3 weeks on this job, no one had ever told him no. He'd prided himself on running the tightest gate in corporate America, which really meant he enjoyed the tiny amount of power his position gave him. And he wasn't about to let some old black woman take that power away. That's it. Bradley reached for his radio. I'm calling Atlanta PD. You're about to find out what happens when you trespass at a major corporation. Go ahead, Dorothy said calmly. Call them. This threw Bradley off. He'd expected her to panic, to beg, to apologize and drive away. But this woman was sitting there like she owned the place. Which, of course, she did. Dispatch, this is Hutchins at the executive gate. Bradley spoke into his radio, his voice loud enough for Dorothy to hear every word. I need Atlanta PD at the Meridian Technologies campus. I've got a trespasser refusing to leave. Elderly black female, possibly mentally unstable, driving a beat-up Honda. She's becoming combative. Dorothy raised an eyebrow. Combative? She hadn't moved. She hadn't raised her voice. She was sitting in her car with her hands folded. But Bradley was already crafting a narrative. Already laying the groundwork to make himself the victim. Dorothy had seen this playbook before. Too many times. I need you to step out of the vehicle. Bradley moved toward her door. Keep your hands where I can see them. I will not be stepping out of my vehicle. Dorothy's voice remained steady. I have done nothing wrong. I have every right to be here. And I will wait for the police to arrive so that this matter can be resolved properly. Bradley's hand moved toward the door handle. Don't, Dorothy said, her voice suddenly sharp. You touch that door, and I will have you charged with assault. I will have you charged with unlawful detainment. And I will have you charged with harassment. Bradley hesitated. Something in her voice gave him pause. This wasn't the reaction of someone who was scared. This wasn't someone who felt powerless. But Bradley was too far gone to back down now. Lady, I don't know who you think you are. Then let me tell you. Dorothy finally turned to look at him. I am a citizen of the United States. I am a resident of Georgia. I am a woman who has committed no crime, broken no law, and violated no policy. You have insulted me. You have threatened me. You have called the police on me for the crime of existing while black. And every single word you've said has been recorded. She pointed to her dashboard. Bradley looked. The red light on her dashcam was blinking. That's... Bradley sputtered. That's illegal. You can't record me without my consent. Georgia is a one-party consent state, Dorothy said calmly. I could teach you that, but I suspect you're about to learn a lot of lessons today. And just when things seemed like they couldn't get worse, they did. Because another car was pulling up to the gate. A silver Mercedes with tinted windows. Bradley turned, momentarily distracted, as the Mercedes stopped behind Dorothy's Honda. The driver's door opened. And out stepped Reginald Torres, Meridian Technologies' chief operating officer. Reginald was a tall man in his 50s, distinguished, wearing a perfectly tailored suit despite it being a Saturday. He was coming in to help set up for the same party Dorothy was heading to, the surprise celebration for her granddaughter. He'd known Dorothy for 18 years. She'd hired him when he was a struggling middle manager at a company that didn't appreciate him. She'd mentored him, promoted him, and treated him like family. And now he was watching some security guard terrorize her at the gate of her own company. "What's going on here?" Reginald's voice was calm, but his eyes were not. Bradley puffed up again, grateful for what he assumed was backup. "Sir, I've got a trespasser here refusing to comply. I've already called PD. Everything is under control." Reginald looked at Dorothy. Dorothy looked at Reginald. Neither of them said a word. But here's the part that changed everything. Reginald made a decision. He wasn't going to reveal who Dorothy was. Not yet. He wanted to see exactly how deep this hole Bradley was digging would go. "I see," Reginald said slowly. "And what makes you believe this woman is trespassing?" Bradley gestured at Dorothy's car. "Look at her. Look at what she's driving. Look at how she's dressed. Does that look like an executive to you?" Reginald's jaw tightened. "What do you think an executive looks like?" Bradley seemed confused by the question. "I mean, you know. Professional. Put together." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Not like that." Reginald nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "She claims she works here," Bradley continued, growing more confident. "But I've been at this gate for 3 weeks, and I've never seen her. Company this big probably has all kinds of people trying to get inside, right? Scammers, homeless people, thieves." "Did you just call me a thief?" Dorothy interrupted. Bradley turned back to her. "I'm saying if the shoe fits." "Bradley." Reginald's voice cut through the air like a knife. "I'm going to stop you right there." "Why?" Bradley looked confused. "I'm just doing my job, sir. Protecting the company from." "From what?" Reginald stepped closer. "From women who don't fit your idea of what success looks like? From people whose skin color makes you assume they're criminals." Bradley's confidence flickered. I'm not racist. I'm just being careful." "Careful?" Reginald repeated the word like it was toxic. "You've called this woman mentally unstable. You've accused her of being on welfare. You've implied she's a thief. You've called the police because she tried to enter a parking lot. And you've done all of this because she's black and her car isn't expensive enough for your standards." "Sir, I heard everything." Reginald held up his phone. "I started recording the moment I pulled up. That's almost 4 minutes of evidence. Combined with whatever Mrs. Jenkins has captured on her dashcam, I imagine we have quite a comprehensive record of your behavior today." Bradley's face went pale. Mrs. Jenkins. The way Reginald said her name, with such respect, such familiarity, sent a chill down Bradley's spine. "Wait," Bradley said slowly. "You know her?" Reginald smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Everyone at Meridian Technologies knows her, Bradley." Bradley's radio crackled. "Hutchins, this is command. Cancel the police request immediately. I repeat, cancel the police request." Bradley grabbed his radio, his hands shaking. "What? Why? I have a trespass." "Hutchins." The voice on the radio dropped to a deadly serious tone. "That woman you've been harassing? Do you know who she is?" "She said her name was Dorothy Jenkins, but—" "Dorothy Mae Jenkins," the radio voice cut him off. "Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Technologies. The woman who signs your paycheck. The woman who built this company from nothing. The woman whose name is on the building." Bradley's entire body went rigid. He looked up at the towering corporate headquarters behind the gate. And there it was, in massive letters across the top of the building. Meridian Technologies. Founded by Dorothy Mae Jenkins, 1981. Bradley's radio fell from his hand. "No," he whispered. "No, no, 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 no." Dorothy finally opened her car door. She stepped out slowly, with the dignity of a woman who had never needed anyone's validation. "Now," Dorothy said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of everything she'd built, "I believe I was trying to enter my parking lot." Bradley stumbled backward. "Mrs. Jenkins, so, I had no idea." "You had no idea?" Dorothy stepped toward him. "Tell me, Bradley. If I were white, would you have had any idea?" Bradley couldn't speak. "If I were white and driving a 10-year-old car, would you have assumed I was a thief? If I were white and wearing comfortable clothes on a Saturday morning, would you have called me Section 8? If I were white, would you have slammed your hand on my window and threatened to have me arrested?" Bradley's eyes filled with tears. But Dorothy wasn't finished. "I have spent 43 years building this company. I have spent 68 years being told I don't belong in rooms I built with my own hands. And I have spent this entire morning being humiliated by a man who decided my worth based on the color of my skin and the age of my car." She stepped even closer. "I could destroy your career with a phone call. I could have you escorted off this property in handcuffs. I could make sure you never work in security again." Bradley fell to his knees. "Please," he begged. "Please, I have a family. I have a daughter. I need this job." "And I needed dignity this morning," Dorothy said. "But we don't always get what we need, do we?" The air hung heavy between them. And just when Bradley thought he understood how much trouble he was in, he realized the nightmare was only beginning. What he didn't know was who was watching. Because while Bradley had been humiliating Dorothy at the gate, 17 people in the security command center had been watching every second. But they weren't the only ones. And the footage that was about to surface would reveal that Dorothy wasn't Bradley's first victim. She was just the one who fought back. Within 15 minutes, the Meridian Technologies campus had transformed. 3 police cruisers were now parked near the executive gate, not for Dorothy, but to take statements. The company's head of security, a former FBI agent named Marcus Webb, had arrived personally. And Bradley Hutchins was sitting in the security booth, his head in his hands, while 2 officers stood nearby. But here's the part that changed everything. Dorothy had made a decision. She wasn't going to just fire Bradley and move on. She wasn't going to sweep this under the rug like so many corporations do when their employees behave badly. She was going to investigate. "Marcus," Dorothy said, pulling the head of security aside. "I want to see every recording from this gate for the past 3 weeks. Every interaction Bradley Hutchins has had with anyone entering this property." Marcus nodded grimly. "I was actually coming to tell you, we've already started pulling the footage. And..." He hesitated. "And what?" "It's bad, real bad." They moved to the security command center, a high-tech room filled with monitors showing every angle of the corporate campus. Dorothy sat down as Marcus pulled up the recordings. The first video showed a black delivery driver being made to wait 20 minutes while Bradley verified his paperwork that took 30 seconds for other drivers. The second video showed a Latina employee being forced to empty her purse because Bradley claimed she looked suspicious. The third video showed a young black man in a nice suit being denied entry entirely because Bradley said his employee badge looked fake. The man had to call his manager to personally vouch for him, a humiliation witnessed by dozens of other employees. But it was the fourth video that made Dorothy's blood run cold. The footage was from just 5 days ago. It showed an elderly black woman, someone's grandmother, Dorothy thought, being brought to tears at the gate while Bradley mocked her, called her confused, and threatened to call Adult Protective Services because she clearly wandered off from somewhere. That woman had been visiting her son, a senior software engineer who had worked at Meridian for 12 years. She had been bringing him his late wife's birthday flowers she'd planned to take to the cemetery that afternoon. And Bradley had made her cry. Dorothy watched the woman's shoulders shake. Watched her wipe her eyes. Watched her finally drive away in shame, without ever seeing her son. "That's Lillian Foster," Marcus said quietly. James Foster's mother. James filed a complaint, but he trailed off. But what? But Bradley's supervisor dismissed it. Said Mrs. Foster was probably confused, and Bradley was just doing his job. Dorothy turned slowly in her chair. Who is Bradley's supervisor? Marcus pulled up a personnel file. The name hit Dorothy like a truck. Derek Whitman. Derek Whitman, who had been with the company for 15 years. Derek Whitman, who had been passed over for promotion 6 times. Derek Whitman, who Dorothy had personally reprimanded twice for making inappropriate comments about diversity hires. Derek Whitman had hired Bradley Hutchins. And suddenly, this wasn't about one racist security guard anymore. This was about a pattern. Get Derek Whitman in here, Dorothy said, her voice steel. Now. 20 minutes later, Derek Whitman walked into the conference room with the confidence of a man who had no idea his career was about to end. He was 52 years old, heavy-set, with a permanent smirk that Dorothy had always found unsettling. But he'd been protected by tenure, by relationships, and by a system that made it hard to fire people without documented cause. Dorothy had never been able to prove her suspicions about Derek. Until now. You wanted to see me, Derek said, settling into a chair without being invited. Dorothy sat across from him, a folder in front of her. Tell me about Bradley Hutchins. Derek shrugged. Good kid. Eager. Former mall security. I thought he'd be a good fit. A good fit for what? For keeping the gates secure. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. We've had issues with unauthorized people trying to get on campus. Bradley takes that seriously. I see. Dorothy opened the folder. And how does Bradley determine who's unauthorized? Common sense, mostly. You can usually tell when someone doesn't belong. Can you? Dorothy slid a photograph across the table. It was a still from the security footage, Bradley harassing Lillian Foster. What about this woman? Could you tell she didn't belong? Derek glanced at the photo. I don't know who that is. That's Lillian Foster. She was visiting her son, James, who has worked here for 12 years. Bradley reduced her to tears and turned her away. Did you know about this? Derek shifted in his seat. I received a complaint. I investigated. Bradley said she was being uncooperative. She was bringing her son flowers for his late wife's birthday, Dorothy interrupted. She was a 74-year-old grandmother. What exactly was she being uncooperative about? Derek's smirk faltered. Dorothy slid another photograph across. Then another. Then another. Delivery driver. Employee. Visiting family member. Contractor. Dorothy's voice was ice. All people of color. All harassed, detained, or turned away by Bradley Hutchins. All complaints dismissed by you. Derek's face went red. Now hold on. You're making this into a race thing, and it's not. I'm not making it into anything. Dorothy stood up. The footage speaks for itself. The pattern speaks for itself. And your hiring decisions speak for themselves. My hiring decisions? I pulled Bradley's application file. Dorothy slid another document across. He was flagged during the background check. 2 previous complaints of racial harassment at his last job. 2. And you hired him anyway. Derek's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. You knew, Dorothy said. You knew exactly what kind of person he was. And you hired him because you wanted someone at that gate who would do exactly what he's been doing. That's not, you can't prove. I don't need to prove anything, Derek. Dorothy leaned forward. I own this company. And as of this moment, you no longer work for it. Derek's face went white. You can't fire me. I have rights. I have a contract. Your contract has a morality clause. You have violated it systematically for years. You will receive nothing but what is legally required. And if you attempt to fight this, I will make sure that every media outlet in this country sees the footage I have. I will make sure that your name is synonymous with the kind of institutional racism that destroys black people's dignity every single day. Derek stared at her. Is that clear? Derek said nothing. Two security officers appeared at the door. "Please escort Mr. Whitman off the property," Dorothy said. "He is no longer an employee of Meridian Technologies." As Derek was led away, Dorothy felt something she hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the power of wealth or position, she'd had that for decades. But the power of justice. But here's what no one expected. Derek Whitman wasn't going to go quietly. And the war he was about to start would force Dorothy to make the hardest decision of her life. If only she knew what was coming next. The story should have ended there. Bradley Hutchins fired. Derek Whitman terminated. Justice served. But 3 days later, Dorothy Mae Jenkins woke up to a nightmare. Her phone was flooded with notifications. News alerts. Social media mentions. Text messages from her entire board of directors. She opened her laptop and felt her stomach drop. The headline screamed across every major news site. Elderly CO destroys hardworking security guard's life over minor misunderstanding. Beneath it was a photograph of Bradley Hutchins, not the angry, aggressive man from the security footage, but a carefully staged image of him looking sorrowful, holding his young daughter's hand. The article, posted on a popular conservative news site, painted a very different picture of what had happened. According to the article, Bradley was a struggling single father just trying to do his job. Dorothy was a power-hungry executive who overreacted to a minor question about her identity. Bradley had been unfairly terminated because Dorothy's fragile ego couldn't handle being asked for identification. There was no mention of the slammed window. No mention of the Section 8 comments. No mention of the other employees Bradley had harassed. No mention of the pattern of racism. Just a carefully crafted narrative designed to make Dorothy the villain. And it was spreading. Within hours, #JusticeForBradley was trending on social media. People who knew nothing about what really happened were calling Dorothy a monster. Conservative commentators were using the story to attack woke corporations and diversity initiatives. Bradley Hutchins had hired a media consultant. And that media consultant was working with Derek Whitman. This was their revenge. Dorothy's phone rang. It was Reginald Torres. "Have you seen it?" His voice was tight with anger. "I've seen it. It's lies, Dorothy. Every word is lies. We have the footage. We have the documentation. Why aren't we releasing it?" "Because..." Dorothy closed her eyes. "Because I know what happens when a black woman defends herself publicly. I know what happens when we fight back. We become angry. We become aggressive. We become everything they want to call us. So what? You're just going to let them destroy your reputation?" Dorothy was silent for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "I'm going to destroy theirs." Dorothy Mae Jenkins had not built a $4 billion company by being passive. She had survived discrimination, sabotage, and betrayal at every level of her career. She had watched competitors try to steal her innovations. She had fought patent battles that lasted years. She had stared down investors who told her a black woman could never run a tech company. And she was not about to let Bradley Hutchins and Derek Whitman win. Within 48 hours, Dorothy had assembled a team. Her legal counsel. Her PR firm. And most importantly, 27 witnesses. These were the other victims of Bradley Hutchins. The delivery drivers he'd humiliated. The employees he'd demeaned. The family members he'd turned away. And they were ready to speak. Dorothy called a press conference for Friday afternoon. Every major news outlet in Atlanta was there. National networks had sent crews. The story had become too big to ignore. Dorothy stood at the podium in the Meridian Technologies Conference Center. Behind her was a screen displaying the company's logo. Beside her stood Lillian Foster, the grandmother Bradley had made cry, and James Foster, her son. "Good afternoon," Dorothy began. "My name is Dorothy Mae Jenkins. I am the founder and CEO of Meridian Technologies. And I am here today to tell you the truth about what happened at my company's gates, and about the men who are trying to bury that truth." She clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up with footage. Not the edited, sanitized version Bradley's team had released. The real footage. The audience watched in silence as Bradley Hutchins slammed his palm against Dorothy's window. as he called her Section 8, as he threatened to have her arrested for trespassing at her own company. But that wasn't all. Dorothy showed footage of Lillian Foster being brought to tears. She showed footage of the delivery driver being detained for 20 minutes. She showed footage of the young black employee being denied entry. She showed documentation of Bradley's previous complaints that Derek Whitman had ignored when he hired him. "This is not about me," Dorothy said, her voice steady and strong. "This is about a pattern of behavior that has been allowed to flourish because the victims are people of color. Because we are expected to stay quiet. Because when we speak up, we are called aggressive. Because when we demand dignity, we are called fragile." She turned to face the cameras directly. "I am 68 years old. I have spent my entire life building something that generations told me was impossible. And I will not apologize for demanding to be treated with respect in the company I created with my own hands." Lillian Foster stepped forward next. "I just wanted to bring my son some flowers," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "For his wife's birthday. She passed 3 years ago. And that man at the gate, he looked at me like I was nothing. Like I was less than nothing. He made me cry. And then he made me leave." Her voice broke. "I never got to see my son that day. I never got to give him those flowers." James Foster put his arm around his mother. "When I filed a complaint," James said, "I was told my mother was probably confused. I was told Bradley was just doing his job. I was told to let it go." He looked directly at the cameras. "I will not let it go." One by one, the other victims came forward. Each told their story. Each shared their experience. Each added another piece to the pattern of discrimination that Bradley and Derek had created and protected. By the end of the press conference, no one could deny the truth. What happened next shocked everyone. Because the consequences for Bradley Hutchins and Derek Whitman were about to go far beyond losing their jobs. And the woman they had tried to destroy was about to show them the true meaning of justice. The fallout was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours of the press conference, #JusticeForBradley collapsed. The hashtag was overtaken by people sharing the real footage, calling out the lies, and demanding accountability. The conservative news site that had published the original hit piece quietly removed it from their website, but not before screenshots had been preserved by journalists documenting their attempt to cover up the truth. Bradley Hutchins deleted all his social media accounts. Derek Whitman went silent. But Dorothy Mae Jenkins was not finished. The Atlanta District Attorney's Office announced an investigation into Bradley Hutchins' conduct, not just at Meridian Technologies, but at his previous employers as well. The 2 previous complaints of racial harassment that Derek had ignored when hiring him? Those victims came forward too. Bradley was facing multiple charges of harassment and intimidation. Derek Whitman was facing charges of negligent hiring practices and potential conspiracy. And both men were now defendants in a civil lawsuit filed by Lillian Foster and 5 other victims, seeking damages for emotional distress, discrimination, and violation of their civil rights. The lawsuit was funded entirely by Meridian Technologies. By Dorothy Mae Jenkins. "These men thought they could hide behind their positions," Dorothy said in an interview 3 weeks later. "They thought they could intimidate people with fewer resources, fewer connections, fewer platforms. They were wrong." But justice wasn't just about punishment. Dorothy knew that destroying these men wouldn't change the system that created them. So she did something bigger. She established the Jenkins Foundation for Dignity, a multi-million-dollar organization dedicated to fighting discrimination and providing legal resources to victims of racial harassment who couldn't afford representation. She implemented mandatory bias training at Meridian Technologies, not the superficial kind that companies do for appearance, but comprehensive, ongoing education with real accountability measures. She restructured the security department entirely, bringing in diverse leadership and establishing clear protocols to prevent what had happened to her and the other victims from ever happening again. And she personally reached out to every person Bradley Hutchins had mistreated during his 3 weeks at the gate. Every single one received a personal apology from the CEO. Every single one was invited to a dinner at Dorothy's home. Every single one was told that their dignity mattered. 4 months later, Bradley Hutchins stood in an Atlanta courtroom. He was no longer the puffed-up security guard who had slammed his hand on Dorothy's window. He looked small, deflated, terrified. His lawyer had tried everything, every excuse, every justification, every attempt to minimize what he'd done. But the footage was undeniable. The pattern was undeniable. The witnesses were undeniable. Mr. Hutchins, the judge said, a stern black woman in her 60s who had seen cases like this too many times, you have been found guilty of multiple counts of harassment and intimidation. You have demonstrated a pattern of behavior that specifically targeted people of color, particularly black Americans, in the performance of your duties. Bradley stared at the floor. You are sentenced to 18 months probation, 400 hours of community service, specifically with organizations serving communities of color, mandatory completion of a racial sensitivity program, and a permanent bar from any security or law enforcement position. Bradley's shoulders shook. But more than any legal consequence, the judge continued, I want you to understand something. The woman you harassed that morning, Dorothy Mae Jenkins, is not exceptional in her humanity. Every person you stopped at that gate, every person you demeaned and degraded, was deserving of the same dignity and respect. They did not need to be CEOs to deserve that respect. They did not need to be wealthy or powerful to deserve that respect. They were human beings. And you forgot that. Bradley was led out of the courtroom. Derek Whitman's case was settled out of court. He paid significant damages, issued a public apology, and agreed to never work in human resources or hiring again. But the most important outcome wasn't legal. It was cultural. The case became a national conversation. It sparked discussions about how black Americans are treated in everyday situations, at gates, at stores, at traffic stops, at their own workplaces. Dorothy's press conference footage was shared millions of times. Her words became a rallying cry. We are expected to stay quiet. We are expected to absorb the indignity. We are expected to prove our worth to people who have already decided we are worthless. But not anymore. 3 months after the trial, Dorothy Mae Jenkins hosted her granddaughter's belated birthday party. It was held in the same conference room where the press conference had taken place, but now it was transformed with balloons, streamers, and photos documenting 4 generations of their family. Dorothy's granddaughter, Maya, was turning 18. She was brilliant, fierce, and ready to change the world. She had already been accepted to MIT, where she planned to study computer science, following in her grandmother's footsteps. But before the cake was cut, Maya asked to say something. She stood in front of the gathered family and friends, her eyes finding her grandmother's. Grandma, Maya said, her voice thick with emotion, when I was little, you told me something I didn't understand. You said, the world will try to make you small. Your job is to take up space anyway. Dorothy nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I didn't understand what you meant then. But I understand now. Maya's voice grew stronger. You built this company when nobody believed you could. You faced down racists, and doubters, and people who wanted to destroy everything you created. And you never let them make you small. Maya walked over to her grandmother and took her hands. What happened at that gate could have broken someone else. But not you. You took something ugly and turned it into something powerful. You stood up not just for yourself, but for every person who couldn't stand up on their own. Dorothy pulled her granddaughter into a hug. That's what you taught me, Grandma, Maya whispered. That dignity isn't something other people give you. It's something you claim for yourself. And that's the truth, isn't it? Dorothy Mae Jenkins was 68 years old when a security guard tried to tell her she didn't belong at her own company. She was wearing a house dress and driving a 10-year-old car. She looked nothing like what that guard thought a CEO should look like. And that was exactly the point. Because the world is full of Bradleys, people who decide your worth based on what you're wearing, what you're driving, and what you look like. But the world is also full of Dorothys, women who have built empires with nothing but determination and dreams, who have faced down discrimination and doubt at every turn, and who have refused to let anyone make them feel small. Dorothy could have driven away that morning. She could have accepted the humiliation and moved on with her day. But she didn't. She stayed. She recorded. She demanded justice. And in doing so, she reminded every black woman watching that your dignity is not up for debate. Not at a gate. Not at a traffic stop. Not at a store counter. Not anywhere. You belong everywhere you stand. And no one, has the right to tell you otherwise. Would you have stayed quiet in Dorothy's position? Would you have driven away? Or would you have done exactly what she did, planted yourself like a tree and demanded what was rightfully yours? Whatever your answer, remember this. Dorothy Mae Jenkins didn't win because she was a CEO. She won because she was right. The title doesn't matter. The car doesn't matter. The outfit doesn't matter. What matters is this. Every black mother, every black grandmother, every black woman who has ever been told she doesn't belong somewhere, you have just as much right to dignity as anyone else. And if the world forgets that, remind them. The way Dorothy did. Her victory was more than personal. It reminded every black mother watching that dignity doesn't stop at a security gate. It reminded every black grandmother that your worth is not determined by what you're wearing or what you're driving. It reminded every black woman that when someone tries to make you feel small, you have the power to stand tall. Dorothy Mae Jenkins built a $4 billion company from nothing. But her greatest achievement wasn't Meridian Technologies. It was the way she stood in that parking lot, in her house dress and her comfortable shoes, and refused to let anyone take her dignity away. That's the legacy. That's the lesson. And that's the truth that will outlast us all.